you, Rory. That's right. Well, my name's Chi Onwara, and I'm the Labour MP for Newcastle Central, which isn't really a rural constituency, but though we have a wonderful town moor. I'm also have 23 years experience as an electrical engineer in the telecoms industry, 5 of those working actually for Ofcom, which still is, the UK regulator of telecommunications. So I'm just really interested in this area, and I just think it's so important for the country that we get it right in Newcastle and in Penrith and in Cumbria. And I was just, there's so many great presentations, such a lot I could pick up on, but I wanted to ask you about, you talked about the universal service as a commitment, isn't it, in the US, and how it was, you were looking at changing it to pay for broadband, how it was, you described it as a levy of a couple of, we've had a few discussions about whether there should be government money for universal broadband and how, and superfast broadband, and how that might be raised. And just wondered if you could share the experience in the US and what it is that you're changing there.
Sure. I'm going to guess in the 50s, there was some legal actions taken by our Congress that said, look, if we want telephone in northern Michigan, or some of our other more remote areas, we need to find a way to support it. We refer to it as our Universal Service Fund. I was trying to use your language, but we call it USF. So if you hear an American say USF, it's the same thing. And as part of the 96 Act, we strengthened our commitment to that. And the way it works is everyone that has a phone bill, not a cellular bill. So small problem if you consider the trend of fewer wired phones and more wireless phones, but I'll get to that problem in a minute. But if you have a regular old phone bill, you pay, there's a charge down at the bottom, what is it, a couple dollars?
I think it's about $2.
Yeah, $2, and then everybody pays it. And if you add that up, you get about, I think it's about $7 billion. Okay, once you start, there are a lot of people in our country, so you kind of add that up and you get.
Not a small fund.
Yeah, it's not a small fund. There are many issues, and the fund is primarily to support telephone. Okay, that's what it's designed for. Lots of creative people have been finding ways to use the fund to do broadband. Kind of bending the rules without breaking them, and sort of all permutations of interesting ideas. Part of what we're trying to do at the FCC is to let's just be honest about it, and let's fund broadband, and let's kind of tune the program to not just support voice service, but support broadband networks that can also support voice. So there's kind of a 3-stage process we want to use over the next 5 years to transform the fund. It'll start with with actually doing some reforms. So there's parts of the fund left over that we don't need anymore and we should just stop doing. The second part of reforming the fund is creating what's referred to as the Connect America Fund, which will be the mechanism to really fund broadband deployments for that part of the population that needs ongoing support. So not grants. This is ongoing. I get support for my broadband line every month or every year or whatever. And then towards the end, there's some other kind of regulatory issues that we want to work through that affect the charging in the wholesale market that relate to universal servicing. I'm happy to go through the details later, but in general, we want to point that cash flow towards broadband services. And it's going to take several years to do it. We don't want to change the cash flow. There are many in our country who would like to raise the dollar amount. The administration and Chairman Janikowski have been very clear we want it to stay with inflation. So we may let it go up, a penny or two as inflation happens, but we're committed to maintaining the size of the fund, trying to show a little fiscal restraint, which we all probably need to do these days, and in general point that cash flow to the appropriate place. This is really hard, and the reason is because there's a lot of small businesses that often receive money to provide telephone services from this fund. So when you start monkeying with it, you're affecting jobs, you're affecting the telephone service of a lot of Americans. So one of the most important parts of it is a very long-term transition. My view is this is the hardest lift that the FCC has. The spectrum work, while really important, is kind of stuff they do every day, and I think they'll get through that. But going through this transition, when you consider all the different constituents, is actually going to be very difficult. But that's how it works in the U.S., and that's the intent.
Okay. Sorry, I'm coming in just from the back, just on a time issue. I'm very, very sorry. Maybe we can let you follow up just in the next session, but there's just two people up here who we wanted to bring in, and we've really got to move on in about 5 minutes. So if you take two questions at once, please.
Rory, thank you very much. Eric, thinking about applications and thinking about the use of broadband for delivering public services and enabling access to public services in remote and dispersed rural areas. If you were advising the UK government, what would you be suggesting that they do, particularly around healthcare, given that we have a national health service and a centralised health funding system? What would you be advising that they should be looking at in terms of investing in applications through the health service, as well as investing in infrastructure? Thank you.
Boy, this is a lovely place, and I visited London several
Eric,
times.
hold, sorry, one second.
Second
Eric, 1 second. Second question coming. Second question, two at a time. Sorry, 1 second.
Okay, Mike Collier, working with Broadband Delivery UK. One of the issues we're contemplating was our discussion with industry is attempting to reuse unused licensed spectrum or get that allocated to allow our wireless operators in rural areas to gain access to basically licensed spectrum, but it's unused in their areas. And I'm wondering whether you've had any success. We're not short of spectrum here. What we do have is a lot of unused spectrum in rural areas. So any comments on that would be welcome.
Happy to kind of run through them quickly. Healthcare, at least in the U.S., I think the problem is similar here. We have a lot of people getting in cars to drive places to do routine doctor appointments. We stopped doing that. There are a lot of things we can do with telemedicine that pull cost out of the system that certainly can't replace the relationship a patient has with a doctor, but can definitely augment it. One of the most important changes that the FCC is doing right now is, in the U.S., if you have one of these and it has a device attached to it that can take your blood pressure or measure the salinity level of your skin or maybe check your pulse, the question is this a healthcare device or a phone? You know, and if it's a phone, the FCC regulates it, and if it's a healthcare device, the FDA regulates it, and the processes are different. And so we actually had a couple very prominent investors come to us and say, I want to invest in healthcare devices, but I am not going to do it until you jokers get your act together so that I know which regulatory process I need to go through, because that's an important part, you know, understanding that timing is an important part of my investment. So I think as you're thinking about, you know, telehealth, make sure you're thinking about the device part of it as well. The FCC and FDA now have a memo of understanding to kind of smooth out that regulatory process, and I'd expect that you'll see a significant amount of device investment. There's already been a lot of device investment in the U.S. from a healthcare standpoint. You'll see more, and I think there's just a lot of benefits that can be derived from the device part of telehealth. And if I were in the UK, I'd want to make sure that the same type of innovation and investment was occurring here. Now, how to do that, as I said, it's a lovely place. I love visiting, but I don't know enough to know how that works. On the reuse of spectrum, there's a bill in Congress right now that we recommended in the plan to give the FCC the authority to do a two-sided auction. And what I say by a two-sided auction, I mean if you own a spectrum license that you're not using, you would have the ability to contribute that license to an auction. The spectrum could be repackaged and re-auctioned, and you would actually get a portion of the proceeds to kind of incent you to sort of clean up, you know, whatever you have lying around the shop floor, so to speak, or the shop airwaves. This is a controversial idea because you're essentially paying someone to give you an asset that is fundamentally a government asset. But the bill does have quite a bit of support on the Hill right now, and our view is that this is an area where we do think a market mechanism can actually help sort that out if it's structured appropriately, and that's what the FCC wants to do. But we have the same problem. We have a lot of spectrum licenses kind of sitting around not being used, and more importantly, not all of them are nationwide, which also makes it kind of tricky. But we have the same problem, and our way to address it is this two-sided auction idea.
Okay, I really wanted to bring in Susan. I'm just going to give one last question to you.
So I agree with
Here we are. Take one last question.
Thanks, Rory. John Freezer from Huawei Technologies. Quick question on network neutrality and the concept of internet toll booths that seem to be emerging out of the US. Broadband is one part of the equation. The applications that are eating up the bandwidth is the other. I wonder if you could give us a couple of comments, please.
You want to flip for it? So this is kind of for the telco folks. This is a huge issue in the U.S. right now. And I didn't want to go into it because it's kind of inside baseball a little bit, but we've got a pretty significant regulatory dust-up over something called net neutrality, which is a set of principles that we want, the government wants carriers to agree to basically allow, to non-discriminate against traffic. So if someone builds an application, we want all networks to allow the traffic for that application. My own view of the issue, and again, I'm going to be clear, I am not speaking for the United States government, I'm sort of done, is the parties are actually closer than everybody thinks, because when you really get down to it, some of these things do make good business sense for the telcos, and as long as kind of cooler heads prevail, this thing should work itself out. And if you really talk to the carriers, they actually don't want to necessarily discriminate against applications. These aren't mean, nasty people. They don't wake up and say, boy, I don't want to do, I don't want to carry that traffic. What they really want, and I think it's very sincere, is they need some ability to manage their networks. One of the issues that we've been working through is the policy debate tends to underestimate the complexity of network management, because we don't have engineers in that debate, we have policy people. So the industry gets very nervous for obvious reasons. When it comes to the kind of pricing issue, all I'll point out is that there was always a point of view that maybe we should always have flat rate pricing, yet AT&T just a few months ago is trying graduated prices and with penalties for high users, and the FCC took no actions. So I think, while the FCC did not issue a statement saying this is a good thing, I think you can take that to say that, they think pricing is actually a useful mechanism to do that. My own view, again, as not a government official, is pricing is the most powerful lever you have on a lot of these network issues. And, if someone wants to consume a ton, we shouldn't allow price gouging, that we should be smart about it, and there may need to be some regulation. But the notion that someone can sort of leave their iPhone on television all day and clog up the network and not pay anyone for it more than the flat rate just doesn't seem right to me. So I think hopefully you'll see kind of a self-regulation type solution in the U.S. on net neutrality, where the carriers kind of come together and say, yes, we're willing to agree to a few principles, not to some others, and then pricing mechanisms and other things will help sort it out. But if anyone wants to talk more about that later, I'm happy to talk about it. Sort of.
Well, to both of our guests, many, many thanks. It's extremely kind of you to come all this way. We've learned an enormous amount, from fascinating insights to the United States to very relevant insights to Cumbria. So thank you both very, very much indeed. Thank you.